Howdy, FrSky people. This is Steve, otherwise known as FrSky Steve, and I am here today to talk to you about the new RF section. It's been updated for Ethos 1.5.x. I'm going to jump in and kind of point out a couple things that I don't think get pointed out very much, and also discuss some things that have not been covered in my previous videos, and I don't really see them covered in anyone else's videos. So we're going to go right to the models. We're going to go into the RF section.
Sensor loss.
And usually we have this turned off and looks like this the first time you open it up. And usually there's a bunch of letters and numbers right here. And if it's your first time registering your receiver, you can give it a cool name like I did, FrSky North America. But if you happen to register and bind receivers, especially ones that are tandem, twin, and Archer Plus receivers, you need to not change this, otherwise you'll have to go back and register and bind all your receivers over again. So this is like a passphrase that goes from the transmitter to the receiver. And during the registration process, this gets communicated to the receiver, and the receiver sends information about its model number, and it also shares information about its firmware. So all in all, very interesting, good stuff there. We have the internal module and external module. External module is anything that goes out of the back port of your transmitter, especially the newer ones, anything that runs Ethos that is a modern transmitter, such as the Tandem, Twin, and Tandem Pro transmitters. They all have what's called light bay modules, and I'll show you what that is. L-I-T-E, light. So they need these smaller modules. If you have an older based transmitter like something like a Tyrannus transmitter, like an X9D, they have these huge modules known as JR modules. Anyway, so these older ones, or these newer ones, are XJTs. Actually, they're all lights. The XJT, this was the original transmit module we had in things like the Tyrannus transmitters, like the X9D. And they were D16, so they ran, well, I'll show you. Here's a brief history of FrSky. Originally they were D8, the first set of transmit modules and receivers we made, and I do mean modules and receivers because these were not transmitters at the time, ran on D8. They are 8 channels. It was revolutionary. It was cool. It was 2010. It was a long time ago. And the only reason they have any type of relevance today is because someone broke in and stole this protocol, or reverse engineered it, and then they are used in toy drones like the Tiny Hawk drones. And so they use these simple little D8 protocols, and you can't work with them on your tandem or twin-based transmitters simply because that doesn't do D8. So what you're going to have to do is switch to one of these older XJT modules, and it'll work with D8 and the older D16 ACCST version 1 and the old LR12 protocol that lasted for exactly one receiver known as the L9R. That was a long-range receiver, and it was outclassed by 900 megahertz. Speaking of 900 megahertz, these are 900 megahertz transmit modules, and the reason why you'd find these in your tandem-based transmitters, you wouldn't normally want to put a second 900 megahertz transmit module on there. Maybe it's for some specialized applications, but most people don't really want to do this. The reason being is the one that comes with the tandem-based transmitters goes up to 1 full watt. And anything that says Pro goes up to 500 milliwatts, and all these other two are less than 500 milliwatts. So These come with these really nice metal casings for allowing heat dissipation, and so these are good if you have a twin base transmitter and for some reason you want to fly with 900 megahertz. You can do that. You can turn on the internal 2.4 gigahertz access and the internal 900 megahertz, external 900 megahertz, and you will still not be able to fly the tandem-based receivers. So it's a nice try. If you want to fly tandem-based receivers, you will have to use the tandem-based transmitters. So these are really relevant for our if somebody who has a twin-based receiver or transmitter, I should say, and wants to use 900 megahertz most of the time. These are often also used by people who are flying with third-party transmitters, and they want to use our 900 megahertz FrSky transmitter modules and receivers. The Twin Light Pro, the one thing I'll point out about that is that will work with a tandem-based transmitter, and somebody a while back figured out that this works at 500 milliwatts, and all the twin-based transmitters like the Twin X-Lite S and the X14 only put out 200 milliwatts. So if you want to get even more power, and this is a glider pilot who did that, and you know, they're always afraid of losing their planes because they're flying them sometimes miles away and thousands of feet up. So they want to get the ultimate in coverage, and so they'll some of these guys started buying the tandem-based transmitters, and they put the Twin Light Pro on there so they can get that 500 milliwatts. Interesting. The other things I'll point out is that they now do PM and SBUS from the back of the transmitter. If that's important to you, it's exciting news. Okay, so enough about this stuff. We're not going to talk about external modules anymore. We'll talk about internal modules. And a lot of this you've seen before, so I'm just going to jump over it fairly quickly. You've seen that, you're familiar with that we have access. This is a simulator of an X20S, so it has access built in, and that access is for the Archer and the Archer Plus line. ACCST D16 also for the Archer Plus line. If you have a choice, I would rather use access. And these are also for the older base ACCST receivers, the ones that can be updated to ACCST version 2.1. And we have the TD mode, that's for the tandem receivers like the TDR10s. If you were to be looking at an X20 Pro, you would see a TW for the Twin protocol and a TD Pro for a receiver that is in the works but not out yet. Okay, so model ID, I'm going to just point out that this should go up. If you have two identical model IDs for two different models, you run the risk of controlling the wrong model, a plane with a model that's not correct for that plane, and you might have poor performance or dangerous performance depending on what the case may be. Channel range, I'm going to briefly cover this. There's 8. People ask us how many channels our receivers or transmitters are. I tell them 24 channels. By default, when you set up a model, it'll say channels 1 through 16. It can be as few as 1 through 8. And you do this so you have the lowest latency possible, because it goes down to 7 milliseconds. But if you want even faster, there's something called the racing mode, which I am not going to get into because it's a bit of a mess to set up. But Falling with Style, Mr. D has a very nice video on that if you would like to check it out. He discusses the racing mode and how to set it up, and he discusses setting up logical switches, and it was a great video. Otherwise, you have problems working with it. Okay, so we are going to go back. Well, the next thing I'll talk about is the difference between 16 channels, which is default, and 24 channels. There's only a couple times you would use this. One of them is if you have one of the two tandem receivers, the TD-SR18 or the TD-R18. If you want to get channels 17 and 18, you're going to have to switch it from the 1 through 16 to 1 through 24. Now, when you do this, just by doing this, you're sending out 50% more information per packet, because this is 1 frame, this is 2 frames, and these are 3 frames. So going from 16 to 24 is 50% more information, and what that means is the latency goes way up. If you're flying something long distance, very far away, it doesn't really matter. If you have a lot of channels hooked up, typically the latency is not really going to make that much of a difference. I don't know if you'll notice it or not. It's very debatable if you can tell the difference between 7 milliseconds and 4 milliseconds, but you're better off sticking to channels 1 through 16. Oh, the other thing you would need channels 24 for would be if you're using an RB unit, like an RB35S, where you can get all 24 channels out. If you don't change this, you only get the first 16 channels out. Okay, now I am going to take you through the registration and bind process. Let me see, before I do that, is there anything else I want to point out? The antennas, don't ever change this to external antenna unless you actually do have an external antenna hooked up in the right port. So you've been warned. If you do that, you're going to get an error eventually, but chances are likely you're going to burn out your transmit module, and that's about a $100 repair. You can see when we work with this, for whatever reason, I can only get access-based receivers. I turn the state on, and what I do is I go down to right here to register, and you plug in the receiver with the register button pushed in, and then after a couple seconds you'll see that the name Archer receiver pops up, and you hit register, and then you hit OK, and you're good. Then when you want to bind it, if you can't find the bind, it's usually right inside of here. But what you do is you find the bind, and then you plug it in. You don't have to hit the registration button. You just plug in the receiver, and you'll see the name SR10 pop up once again, and say OK. Again, I'll show you bind is right here in case it doesn't pop up. So there's some interesting things here. Factory reset is something I'm actually kind of excited about. It's something I asked for. This is a factory reset of the receiver, and my gosh, I really hope this also resets the gyro on the stabilized receivers. That would be so amazing if it does. It would make me so happy. Reset bind, I'll show you. It gets rid of that bind. We'll have to go through once again to get it bound. Share, I have no idea what this is about. We'll find out, but geez, don't know. I'm sure it's interesting. Okay, some other options here. The last two I'm going to get into are the options and the flight data recorder. I'm going to get into the flight data recorder first. So there's something called black box, and you're familiar with that term whenever there's a major plane crash, which fortunately is kind of rare these days, but they always say we're looking for the black box recorder. Most of our receivers these days have black box recorders in there, and they record a whole bunch of information. A lot of this we'll get into, but what I will focus in on are the things where it says, for example, anything that says VFRs, the valid frame rates. I want to know what the minimums and maximums were. And, you know, on a tandem-based receiver on 900 megahertz, I want to see if it dropped below something like 35. Because if you did, you run the risk of having the control link lost, especially if it drops down in the 15s or 10s. That is really dangerous stuff there. But you usually got a lot of warnings, like your low VFR warning will fire up and you should turn your plane around. So occasionally, it's a very sad phone call, and I've had a few people contact me and they ask about the plane crash, and a lot of times I ask me what's going on with the plane crash, why did it crash, and I'm like, dude, I'm not there, I don't know. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear about it, but there's a large variety of reasons why planes crash, and your transmitter and receiver isn't always the top of the list. And don't get me wrong, occasionally we do have stuff that fails, but it's very rare. So when I ask them about the telemetry logging, have you turned it on? And, you know, I'd say 8 out of 10 times either they have no idea what it is, or they didn't set it up right, or they never really checked to see if it was working. And there's one opportunity you have, and that is to, when you walk up to your crash plane with hopefully the battery still plugged in, you can go in there and you can, for your transmitter, get in here. And what I would like you to do is go to the bottom right here and say save to file. And once you do that, we can get into your radio and figure out where this file is located, and I can get a look at this file and at least get some idea what happened. So that is something to keep in mind. I mention this not like hopefully you'll ever need to use it, but we have that black box option available to you, and I think most people don't know how to use it or where it's at. Now, the last thing I'll talk to you about is options. And what happens is you have the option to turn your telemetry on or off. And if you turn off your telemetry, you're not going to get any recorded telemetry. So you be really careful about that. You would usually want this on. The 25 milliwatt telemetry, this is a reduced power amount. Usually the telemetry, I believe, is 100 milliwatts. And so you're significantly lowering the power on this. And because of that, you're going to get telemetry loss messages more often. The reason why you want to turn it down is on the 900 megahertz receivers. They sometimes put out so much power that some servos, namely the high-tech HS645MGs, another one from MKS, and I think there's another one from Savox, that tend to jitter with the 900 megahertz signal. So be very careful with that. If you have that happen, you can turn on 25 milliwatts telemetry, and though it's reduced power, it makes those planes flyable with those servos. The highest PWM speed is, I believe, I'm pretty sure about this one, it's around 50 is the polling rate, and on digital servos they go up to 300. So if you're using digital servos, you should turn this on. If you turn it on and your servos don't move, you should turn it off because you don't have digital servos. And sometimes things are sold as digital servos when they're not really digital servos, and that's all I'll say about that. We're going to talk about the SBUS. This is different from the channel count we had before. This is how much information goes out from the SBUS port. You can either be SBUS 16 channels or SBUS 24 channels. Now, there are receivers in the Archer line known as this is where things get confusing. There's the Archer Plus, SR10 Plus. What's the second plus for? And I find this also be the case with anything with a 6 in it. Anything with a 6 in it, this will not apply to. So TDR6, TDSR6, the R6, they all need to have SBUS in and out from or at least SBUS in from a plug on the side. When you have these Archer Plus, SR10 Plus, or whatever Plus, you'll find that you can switch this and move backwards, and you'll see something that says, long list of things you'll see: SBUS in, SBUS out, smart port, F-port, F-bus. And those are a lot of different types of telemetry protocols or SBUS out protocols. There's only one pin that does SBUS in, and that is pin number 1. So if you have one of those receivers, you would have the option. And I'm going to pretend for a moment that channel 24 is SBUS in, which is really cool, except that it is your left aileron, and you're like, especially when you're flying a plane that has, let's say, the SR10 Plus, and you're saying, hey, that was my stabilized receiver left channel, or channel 1 for aileron. I want it back. How do I get it? You go down to a free pin, and let's say this free pin is channel 6. You just say, let me point out, pin 6 is channel 6. So pins are the things you put your servos in. Channels are assigned by the transmitter, and the channels can be on any pin. So in this particular case, I'm going to remove pin 6 to channel 1. So not only do you get your channel 1 back, but if you plug in your servo, you'll get the stabilized left aileron back. And with that, that's pretty much everything I would like to cover with you as far as this topic is concerned. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section. Thanks for watching.